Hello and welcome back to Get Financially Fit with me, Debbie Hancock. You'll know by now that this podcast is all about making this money stuff feel less heavy and about helping you build a business that actually works for you and not the other way round. You'll know that I care a lot about helping business owners not just bring in money, but keep it, protect it, and build something sustainable. And that means getting the foundations right. One thing I've seen when working with clients as a fractional FD is people avoiding the legal side of their business until it's too late. Contracts, founder agreements, IP protection, it all sounds a bit boring until it goes wrong. Then it's really interesting. So today I'm joined by someone who knows the world inside out. Ian is the founder of New Legal, a legal consultancy built for founders, consultants, creatives, and fast-growing business. He's a legal entrepreneur, 8-time founder, surfer, musician, and crucially, someone who understands how to keep businesses legally protected without it costing the earth or taking months on end. We're going to cover why contracts aren't just for big corporations, exactly what I say about financial strategy, and the classics mistakes people make and what you might be missing out on your business right now. So let's dive in. Ian, for anyone who hasn't come across you yet, can you just give us a quick intro about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks a lot. Good to be on here. Hi, everyone listening. I'm Ian Greig from New Legal. Yeah, after many years in the world of business, I kind of fell into business and, many years of slogging away, trying to create new and interesting businesses, and eventually found myself in the legal space. And believe it or not, which I definitely didn't have any plans to do. But really, I came over to the UK back in 2009. So it's been a good 10 and a half, 15 years now, sorry. And it was kind of like just seeing what happens. Like I came here, I was like, what can I do? I'm going to create an interesting life for myself. I was quite interested in real estate. I wanted to buy property in London and really just found my way into the building trade and managing building sites just randomly after meeting a property investor and developer, Harrods, and ended up working with them. Yeah, so that was cool. And we ended up working together for like 3 years. And I just saw how exciting things were for them and how they were just doing deals and, involving investors and bringing in all different types of partners and, also designing cool properties. Let's face it, some of the properties in the UK with property developers aren't necessarily the nicest. So I found that really cool. And I was like, you know what, let me try and do this myself. Got into the property game, helped people buy and sell properties in London, managed a portfolio initially on the sort of outskirts of London, then worked my way into Central and Kensington, Chelsea. So going from your sort of cheap properties from like 50 grand to listing probably at 10 million in Kensington. And along the way, I set up various ventures like architectural photography, videography, doing business, marketing agency for the property industry. And all this property stuff just like got too much for me. It was just like property this, property that. And I enjoyed the kind of like problem solving aspects of all of that and dealing with the legal stuff and solicitors and barristers. And, a lot goes wrong in the property industry from, everything from like fraud related stuff and some sort of lighter crime to heavier disputes and damage and money issues and all of that stuff. So I kind of became the legal dude and learned all of this in my spare time. And then eventually pivoted more like over time into the legal space and decided to leave the whole real estate career behind eventually 7-8 years ago, and then got into the law. So a few years later ended up setting up my own business, and now there's a small team of us. It started with just me, and now there's a team of like 10, including the more sort of external team members and stuff like that. I'm trying to grow an exciting global brand, more of the kind of like Red Bull feel as far as a business goes, more adventure, risk taking, all of that. So not your traditional stuff. Definitely not. So that's kind of what brings us to today.
Crikey, that is an interesting journey. Where did you come over from?
From South Africa.
I'm not very good with accents. I was like, where's the accent? Where's the accent?
My accents become a bit confused over time, and who knows?
Yeah, diluted by being in London, possibly.
Yeah.
So did you train as someone within the legal system, or do you have people within your company who are like legally trained?
Yeah. So what I did, I kind of did DIY law back in the day, like well over a decade ago. So I kind of learned property law and business law, like practically, pragmatically solving problems, hiring lawyers, avoiding the court system, negotiating, working your way out of trouble, tricky situations, because let's face it, no one wants to spend a lot of money on lawyers and resolving disputes. So I kind of learned that more negotiation and resolution focused kind of problem solving, legal, like street law, property kind of law type stuff, and then pivoted into the business law. And I studied law. I went to a private law school in Cambridge, not Cambridge University, but one of those online private ones. Well, it was actually in person for a year, and then online for the second year, which was awesome. And did the MBA at the same time, just because I was like, the future, a bit concerned about the future. And if I'm going to do law, I need to make sure I understand like how corporates think and multinationals build themselves so I can help myself and clients. And then I studied law, got halfway through my training contract at a really cool law firm in Kent, really forward-thinking law firm, great people there. So they inspired me massively, but I just wasn't cut out for being an employee, unfortunately. And as much as I loved it and we did exciting work with like really quite, amazing clients, it just wasn't for me. So I think, that was kind of like the end of it was my first dabble in employment in a long time. And then that was the last dabble in employment for hopefully for the future. So yeah, I bailed out and I set up New Legal very soon after that. It was a lawyer friend of mine who was working with me at the time, solicitor, ex Magic Circle city lawyer, and then eventually just brought on the best people I could, like really interesting, down to earth people. You know what it's like. You're trying to build a business. You want people you get on well with, you trust massively and are better than everyone else. So that was the goal. They're solicitors and legal consultants. I'm not personally qualified. My experience level, we could say, it's not bad at all in terms of like corporate commercial IP and stuff. But these days I don't touch too much of the actual documents. I do more of the kind of general strategy, group structuring, working with the different lawyers and tax advisors and just getting people's documents and deals done and that kind of stuff. That's my sort of role.
Yeah. And that is what happens with business owners, isn't it? Like they're really good at something. They're good at something. They're passionate about something. They grow this business bigger and bigger and bigger of all these hats they're wearing. And sometimes things slip through the net. So like that's probably how like contracts fall through the net, because they're so excited to get, like I told you earlier about, I've been approached about starting another company, and people are so excited to start this company and move forward with their idea. And actually the boring stuff like legal and finance kind of gets left behind.
It does.
So yeah, do you think that's why business owners are kind of avoiding the legal stuff and leaving it a bit too late?
I think everyone's situation is different, and we run into all different types of people and founders and characters and directors. And, it's one of those things where, yes, I think generally people just tend to avoid some stuff that they have an aversion to, whether that's like numbers, finance, sales, for instance, and then legal being something that could be more expensive, which is a factor. So they put it off, or maybe it's a budget constraint or budget allocation issue and stuff, or timing. But typically, most people know they need to do something, and they eventually get something done. It's just, is it the right thing? Is it at the right time? And, is it something that's going to help them actually achieve their growth objectives rather than just getting something quickly done? So yeah, I think most people aren't so keen, but the bigger businesses, when you've got directors, or, a small business with directors, they're obliged to take care of the business, so they have to do it. So I think they tend to be a little bit more proactive. But yeah, it's an interesting one psychologically with legal. But one of the factors is, I've worked with so many lawyers over time now and so many different types of businesses. I think people assume that it's going to be more complicated or expensive than sometimes it is. There are really great providers out there. I'd like to count us in, that sort of group as well. But because the industry can be quite condescending, sometimes it's like, and also people may have had issues in their family with lawyers, or divorce, or real estate, or inheritance, or anything. And then they assume that business legal stuff is going to be just as problematic for them. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
It's the language as well. Like sometimes, like I read sometimes case law to understand how to deal with tax issues. I know I'm a really exciting person, but sometimes some of them are actually really interesting. And I have to sometimes read contracts. I've got my own contracts, and sometimes the wording, you think, why don't you just write this in English? Like, I know it is in English, but it's quite hard to fully understand if what I think it's saying is what it is saying. Do you understand? Is that what happens?
Yeah, that happens a lot. Some of the clauses are worse offenders than others. Like IP clauses can be pretty complicated. A lot of even, quite experienced lawyers still need to run things past one of their colleagues to work it out. So totally understandable.
Yeah. And you think, why do you make it so complicated then? It's almost like you feel like they're trying to trip you up or something.
Yeah, I mean it's a kind of formulaic in a way. The language, it's, basically a framework, and everything kind of works well for lawyers, but not necessarily for humans to understand and work with. So some of it definitely needs to be, let's call it legalese, just because the effect of certain words, are helpful for contractual and risk mitigation purposes. But generally, like much of the contract, and something we spend a lot of our time on, is like humanizing contracts. They need to be easily understandable. Ideally, there are documents that the users don't have to keep coming back to the lawyer. Because you know, it's like you get a contract and you're digging through it to try and find out what the heck's going on.
Mm.
Like all of the key stuff can be brought up to the front, but one of the reasons that's not done is because it takes time. It's kind of treating it more like a product than a document when you try and make it, UX focused. And also the lawyer's job is to protect the client. So sometimes it's often easier in many ways to just throw a heavy contract at your client for them to use, because you cover yourself as a lawyer. If something goes wrong, the contract was as robust as anything. But
Yeah.
it takes someone really quite talented to do a very short, easily understandable, easily manageable contract. And I don't know if law firms are very focused on that as part of their offering.
Okay. And so how is like your approach? So how are, New Legal, how are they approaching it differently from like these old school law firms?
So a lot of the stuff is the same in terms of the advice and, the more corporate IP stuff, that the essentials that you just need someone with the brain power to give the right advice and make sure things look and sound right and people do the right thing. Like that's just inevitable. So we definitely don't pretend that we're like different in every way.
Yeah.
But the difference for us is that we're not like full service across all different types of areas of law. We're, down the line, corporate, commercial, IP, and data. It's kind of like the essentials for most businesses. And we have a suite of products, which are basically contracts and policies and stuff like global privacy notice, for instance, or like client contracts or shareholders or founders agreements. And because we keep within that range of like 10 to 20 documents, we're always iterating and improving them, taking out the key elements and putting them right at the top in the front so that the users, both sides of the table, can easily work out what's going on and easily use the contracts without coming back to us necessarily. And one of the other things, for example, is we'll try and give people a light, medium, and comprehensive option. So what we find at the moment, especially, is trying to get deals across the line can be tricky. Getting approval or sign off, budget approval, whatever it is, and just getting someone to put the signature on the electronic signature. The longer the contract or the more complicated, the longer it takes and the more risk that the deal is going to fall through. And people are using contracts that could be suitable for like 100K or 500,000 when all they need is something that's like a few pages long to get a deal done. So for instance, the other day I saw a contract for someone who's earning under 100K, but their contract could probably be used by like a heavy regulated business consultant or something, or working in the regulated space. And if you send that to someone, they're going to go, my goodness, like what am I signing? So if it's quick and easy and low risk, it needs to be short and simple. We make sure people have that option. And then in the middle, and obviously higher risk. But even the more complicated stuff like shareholders, founders agreements, things like that, like our mission is to make them super easy to use and for tech to be able to be plugged in. It's quite a funny example, actually. So, people are talking about how like professionals are getting wiped out by AI. If you look at Google Docs and Gemini, so Gemini actually now will interpret your documents. So it actually automatically will like read and review your contracts if you like, if you'd like it to. So if you use heavy legalese in a contract and Gemini has a go at it, you could end up with quite a funny result. So our stuff is actually like a lot more easy for AI to understand, and therefore people can use their AI and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a long answer to it, but it's kind of like products, tech, and solid advice, the combination to help people actually grow rather than just trying to protect ourselves and disclaim all the risk as lawyers.
Yeah.
And not trying to overcharge for stuff that can be simple.
Yeah. And I guess, stifling like business growth by, like you said, pausing contracts and negotiations from happening. So it's funny you're talking about AI, because I was going to say, like, there's a temptation now to just go onto Google or AI or whatever and just get it to like produce you a contract to say a shareholder agreement. But
Yeah.
what kind of risks does that bring up for business owners?
Well, interestingly, the contracts that they do draft in some ways are incredible, and they simplify the English, the wording massively, which is brilliant. But if you think about it, like the essence of a contract is to mitigate or cap your risk, like your liability and disclaimers and things like that, just as an example. And then, of course, dealing with IP and the flow of money. If 80% of the contract is looking good, that's great. But the 20% where it counts, the AI isn't necessarily the best in that area, especially if it's slightly more complicated, higher risk, maybe regulated stuff, or if it's international. The key one for us really is IP. Like IP clauses are one of the clauses where like misspellings and things aren't necessarily a problem. But if you have one word missing, like exclusive, revocable, non-exclusive, perpetual, like if AI misses one of those or the
Right.
scenario that the contract's being used for, it takes, the right combination of words in the IP clause. And unless you're getting that checked by someone who knows what they're doing, that is a massive risk. And the same applies to the limitation of liability. So I'm all for AI, definitely. But I think it's just, you need to have a lawyer on call or your own document where you know that those sections are right and you deal with editing the rest with AI type thing.
Yeah. And the way I see it, it's like, in business, you should be looking at your risk factors within your business. And I see having a lawyer on board as mitigating risk. So I work with a lot of gyms, they're signing leases, and that lease could be K a month contract, 240K for 10 years. And you're
Yeah.
like, you're talking 2.4 million, and they don't want to they don't want to pay for the lawyer to check the contract. And I'm like, you're signing up for a 10-year contract
Right.
where that person can put anything in there in terms of like what's the price rise changes, who's responsible for fixing the roof, or who's responsible for other parts of the building maintenance. And by not getting it checked by a lawyer, what I've then seen is, especially in the last year, really, really large increases in prices when it comes to break clause. And so to me, get the lawyer on board. It might cost you a couple of grand at the start, but that could massively change what happens in the future. So it's worth it.
Completely. Yeah, it really is. Well, back to that question, like why do people avoid it and things? I think there's a contingent of, founders, directors, business owners who have had legal issues in the past and they possibly left a corporate background. They're the first to get stuff done. They just know it needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas other people will, until they've had a legal problem, they don't view it in the same way. So there's kind of like that tipping point where you've either had a legal problem or you haven't. If you have, or you've maybe done 3, 4, 5 businesses, you'll be getting legal done like from the outset, or anytime anyone even offers you anything, or you find some kind of deal or lease or whatever. And then the other people are like, okay, let's see how it goes. We can do this because they're smart in many cases, sometimes sophisticated business owners. So it'll naturally, they may think they can do the contracts, and that sometimes doesn't end well.
Yeah, actually, someone said that to me the other day. They said that they work with really smart people and they're so smart that they then like overcomplicate things or think that maybe they can do it. And actually, the people that are maybe not as book smart, shall we say, I don't know, they are more likely to go out and seek the right support and actually end up with the right solution. So I thought that was quite an interesting comment.
Yeah, that definitely is.
So who typically comes to you for help? Is it like startups, scaling businesses, established, mix?
So it's actually turned out being a mix. We started mainly working with just business consultants and solo people like marketers and stuff with small freelance teams. But now we basically cover 3 areas. It's the knowledge kind of space. So business consultants, growth advisors, accountants, management accountants, that kind of stuff. And then tech businesses. So platforms, apps, AI businesses and any kind of like technology or software of some sort. And then you've got the creative businesses like digital marketing agencies, PR, speakers, got quite a few award-winning businesses across those areas. Interestingly, often combining elements of knowledge, tech, and creative, and that kind of what makes them unique. So our sort of vibe is like new legal, obviously making the legal stuff more interesting and maybe better for the modern founder and board of directors, but also working with businesses that are innovating and doing new stuff. Because these days it is a case of like, what are you going to do? What's new? So really it's people launching new products, new services, new tech, any of that. And they could be right at the beginning on their own, or they could be 5 years in. Or for example, recently we were contacted by a PLC to say, hey, look, could you refresh our contracts? They've been in business for decades and they'd heard that we do like really easygoing ones and their sales were kind of plateauing. So what they wanted to do is get super easy contracts that just get through without lawyers holding them up on the other side. So from solo to PLC at the moment. For full transparency, we didn't actually get the go ahead with the PLC, interestingly, because someone who was a bit more old school decided to go with like a traditional setup.
Right.
Yeah, it gives you a flavor for possibly what's going on in the market and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting that they approached you in the first point, because I worked in a FTSE 100 company, and it was kind of like we had these very, very expensive lawyers that we always used, like a firm in London, always went to them, because that when you're in a high risk business, it's kind of like go with what you know, when actually sometimes you do need to make a change.
Or both, mix and match for different stuff.
Yeah, for different risk levels, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
Like you could have different type of contracts. What's the biggest no moment that someone's come to you with a contract and you've gone on?
You know what? There's so many different examples here. When we look at it like shares, IP, and general contract stuff. Like with the share example, for some reason, sometimes people will transfer shares to someone before they complete any agreement. So they may already have a draft agreement floating around, or they're planning to do one. But one example, someone transferred quite a big chunk of their business, and then eventually I had to just buy them out for, a few £100,000. And that was a business this person had spent forever building, brought a new employee on. The employee was performing well, gave them the shares, didn't do the agreements. The employee eventually just didn't get involved with the business, but still was sitting on a stake that could block certain decisions and stuff. So that was a bad one. And actually just recently, the other day, same thing happened. Someone transferred shares to someone after agreeing a few things in email, and thought it would be convenient to just register the business and do the shares, and then nothing happened after that. But now the business is doing quite well. They've got good technology and stuff, and now they're like, well, what the heck do I do with this person? So those are those ones. Other ones, one example, a tech business providing stuff to like to different corporates. Someone made a mistake in the contract, and instead of the IP being made available to the client as part of the service or whatever, it was actually ownership of all the data collected by the business, and some of the IP was actually, the ownership was transferred to the client. So our business, like as in our client, we had nothing to do with this. They came to us after the fact. They were basically just transferring their most valuable data, insights, and some of their IP to one of their clients, which doesn't make sense. So that business eventually had to be closed down, but they tried to renegotiate. It was a mistake, but for other reasons that didn't go ahead, unfortunately, that business. So those are those ones. And then generally just contracts that have mistakes in them, with the best will in the world, like people will use a contract that looks good, or they do one themselves, and it just has one or two errors in it that are more significant. Sometimes small errors and misspellings aren't a problem at all. But if they're in the wrong areas, especially leaving you open on the liability side, and then, for example, a business scaling up where they sell to consumers and not having the right notices and consumer cancellation stuff, which gives those which could be thousands of customers the right to cancel, an extended cancellation period of up to a year, for example, and that leaves you exposed. So if this business wants to sell, there's one we have in mind, the due diligence will show that they may have, couple of 100,000 or whatever it is in revenue that could just end, and some of it have to be refunded in some cases.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? There's different contracts, there's different like rights to cancellation, isn't there? Whether you're selling to consumer or to another, like B2B. So the contract terms differ, don't they, in terms of those two different audiences. And it's interesting what you mentioned. So I've just gone through a sale with one of my clients, and had due diligence done on the company that was selling. We talk about preparing for sale, prepare for exit. So not only in terms of the strategy, but in terms of like your tax position, it really needs to be thought about in terms of when you're selling and how you prepare for that. But you've just brought up an important point, that your contract could mean that the sale doesn't go through if you haven't got the right terms and conditions. And there's a massive risk element in the business, isn't there? So one, that can either mean the sale doesn't go ahead, or two, it could significantly impact the price you're going to be offered to compensate for that risk. So yeah, preparing for exit, like make sure your contracts are in place beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. It's just getting started with it. So just chatting with someone. Like sometimes people think it's going to be the full spiel. Like if I chat to a lawyer now, it means I'm going to spend 5, 10, 20 grand. Sometimes it's just, a grand. to get like better clarity on some of the things you need to think about and when, and see if there are any red flags,
Yeah.
and then you can actually deal with things as and when you're ready. But just like knowledge is power in so many different ways
Hmm.
with business, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that is a good point, because when you start up a business, not everyone has tons of like cash to
Mm.
inject into that business. And so actually you can start, like a new business probably wouldn't have a finance director in, but as they grow and scale, that's when they would bring in a fractional person. It's the same with legal, like get the most important things in place and then build from that point. So what would you say are like the key things that need to be in place? Like say we're starting a limited company and there's like a few directors involved, and what would be the sort of initial contracts that need to be in place?
Yeah, sure. So very simply, like if you're looking at it in terms of layers or elements, we've got like the corporate kind of ownership layer, the middle commercial day-to-day stuff, and the compliance layer. So, we've got to tick the compliance boxes. That just needs to happen. Like if we talk whatever is relevant for the business, and then let's say data protection, which is interesting because if you want to scale up in markets and target to people, UK or internationally, you need to have the right privacy consents and notices and whatnot in place and cookie stuff. But that's cool because it's growth focused. So you get it right. Those foundations are in place. Your websites and your newsletters and marketing and everything comes in, retarget, advertise, scale. If that's not done right, then, you've got these possible infringements floating around because you haven't done things properly. In the middle, your main contracts, supply of services contracts, influencers, marketing agencies, the suppliers that work for you and create IP for your business. You need to make sure that all the IP is coming in because that's the most valuable thing in many ways. And then, of course, working with the clients, the flow of money, confidential information, data, IP, and limiting your risk and stuff. So whatever those day-to-day contracts are with anyone you're dealing with, or any tech or whatever that you create or use. And then not to worry about the buzzer, timing people, but that's fine. The corporate layer, ownership, who owns the business, on what terms, shareholders agreements, if it's possibly founders agreements, if it's a founders agreement, if it's more simple stuff and you don't want to go too heavy on the shares stuff. And then IP, that's at the essence of most businesses, your assets, what you create, your client databases, all of that stuff, and how you use it, how you protect it, your brand, all of that. And it doesn't need to be hugely complicated. There's some stuff that just needs to kind of be in place and then you can build on it. But those are the layers that we tend to think about with people, is like IP, corporate, commercial, and compliance.
Okay. And so when you say IP, I guess I start thinking like trademarks and stuff. Do you cover trademark, or is that something that they would go off and do separately themselves?
Yeah, so we don't actually do the applications in-house. We advise people, like we're clued up on trademarks, but we outsource, whether it's like to a chartered trademark attorney for proper stuff, should we say proper, and maybe not the right way to describe it, like heavier stuff, global applications, more corporate stuff. And then we've got different businesses that we work with to do the lighter stuff, like the
Yeah.
easygoing one trademark application, logo kind of stuff. So IP is basically all the sort of the like intellectual property assets of a business, and name, bucks, so the name, the logo, the design, slogan, catchphrases, that kind of stuff. And then you've got like your materials, concepts, ideas, confidential informations mixed in there, trade secrets, knowledge, client databases, tech, all your bits and bobs that just sit around in the business there. And then it's not just the trademark side of it, but that
No.
is the important.
A lot more in depth. And then you've got like, it made me think when you said client information, you've got obviously like clauses where I can't think of the word, non-compete. So non-compete clauses. So if you've got employees in the business, they can't just like exit and take everyone with them. There's like often a cooling off period, isn't there? 6 months,
Yes.
12 months, whatever it is.
Yeah, so that's a business protection thing. So I totally left out employment. Laura would absolutely kill me if she heard. She was like, Ian, what are you doing? But yeah, so we do quite a lot of employment and HR stuff as well. And that's, people setting up a new business and making sure that they don't fall foul of the restrictions that you mentioned, when they exit a corporate and start a competing business, and, don't poach their employees or the previous clients and stuff. But then obviously for a business itself, that to protect its value and its client database and revenue and everything, like you need to make sure that those people are locked down, like as far as you can legally do,
Hmm.
to restrict them. most people will have the right kind of stuff that we come across. But yeah, sometimes that's missing, and they find that someone has left, they've taken all the clients, or they've already started working on the side. They grow a business, and suddenly it goes from a business up here to there, and then your employees taken everything. So you need to have recourse. You need to have a basis grounds to something to fall back on, and that is bringing that back up the other way by claiming against them if need be.
Cool. So you've run 8 businesses yourself, and so you've been on like both sides of the fence. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from being a founder as well as a legal advisor?
It's a speed thing. Definitely taking too long to take action definitely causes problems. That includes just focusing on like growth when it comes to legal. I've seen how bad contracts, long contracts can slow everyone down. And if you want to grow a business and you want to enter new markets or launch a new product or service or get deals done, even M&A deals or partnership deals, the quicker the contract gets signed, the faster you're getting the money in the bank or the reputation growing or the risk levels down. And really it's the speed thing. It's growth focused legal, and getting equipped with the right kind of contacts in the legal, financial, tax space. Some people are just old school in the professional industries, and that just doesn't work. It really doesn't work these days, partly because of the innovation that's going on, the tech, the compliance and stuff, and also just the responsiveness that I think people need these days. If you approach a bigger organization, some are brilliant, but some you'll just end up in a black hole of onboarding, and you're trying to do deals and you end up racking up costs and it just becomes a problem. So like we were saying earlier, if you have, fractional person, quick, responsive, involved, knowledgeable about what you're doing, committed, invested, all that stuff, same applies to legal. Like we try and get involved. We have each of our lawyers will get involved in the business. They know what's potting, they know what the plans are, and they're focusing on growth. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen across bigger businesses and the solo ones, is just kind of taking a little bit too much of a slow poke, sort of old school approach to things.
Right. Yeah. I think it is true though. Like when my client was coming to sell, I ended up working just a bit on like the weekend a little bit, and I don't work weekends as a rule. But because it was like a unique situation and we wanted to move fast, I kind of flexed to do that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not advocating like working outside your normal hours, but I had the ability to do that, and I really wanted to help them process the purchase in the timelines we were given. Whereas a bigger firm, wouldn't be doing that. And you do come to know your clients, don't you? And you come to be slightly involved in what they're doing. And I really wanted like a positive outcome for them. So yeah.
Well, you know what? That is, in my view, genuinely a strategic advantage for any client, is to spend time finding the right partners. It is a partnership thing. It's having people invested. Like some of our clients have left corporate careers, or they've come through entrepreneurship and done various different businesses, and they're consultants and advisors, and they really are, like, they go above and beyond. They're incredibly knowledgeable, and it would cost way more to hire, a strategy firm like a McKinsey or a Deloitte, or even to go to like an accountancy business when you've got solo or very small team collaborations. And these people know just as much, if not more, than some of the better people at the bigger firms. So you're not only getting the cost saving, you're getting that knowledge, and that can actually drive the growth. The speed and the knowledge is incredibly valuable. And we're trying to do that on the legal front. It's not easy because people are stuck with providers, but I think there's definitely a shift in that exciting kind of fractional working with solo and small businesses and collaborations rather than the more traditional route. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's funny that you say about trapped in contracts, because I had some clients who wanted to come over to me and they were locked into like year contracts, whereas I kind of had like the 30-day notice. I was just like, I don't want to keep anyone that doesn't want to work. Like, I just want them to go and move on. So got a lot of these old kind of accountancy firms that have got long-term contracts that lock people in. So
yep,
we're wrapping up now. So if you had one business rule to live by, what would it be?
When I always go blank when I get asked.
What's this one thing? Or we could say, what do you prefer? Do you prefer surfing or being a musician?
Definitely surfing. Sometimes I feel a bit more at home on the beach or on land than I do like generally, kind of. But yeah, you know what? I'm just generally excited about the future. Like there's quite a lot of doom and gloom, and it is stressful trying to work out what to do with ourselves and where to focus and what not to do and who to hire, where to spend money or not. But I just think that there's some great people out there to collaborate with and to bounce ideas off and see what's working and what's not. And that kind of like visibility of like where the gaps are in the market. You know, people get so caught up in board of directors, day-to-day consulting and services, or starting a business and trying to make it work. Actually, having enough conversations with the right people definitely start opening doors. And that's why LinkedIn's awesome. You know, we obviously met through there, met some brilliant people. And I see that as being an exciting opportunity for people who are willing to go out and get it.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I really like doing the podcast because I'm getting to speak to different people. I went to a networking event last night in Brighton, and just those conversations that come up. We called it like group therapy, where we could be like, right, I've got this issue. Like, how can you help? What would you do? Yeah. So that is a wrap for this episode. Huge thanks to Ian for joining me and making the legal stuff feel a lot more doable. Honestly, if you're sat here thinking, I've no idea what to do with my contracts or what I have in place, what I don't have in place, you're definitely not alone. But it's one of those things that you'll wish you had sorted sooner if something goes wrong. As always, I'd love to know what you thought about our call today. Message me or drop a comment or send a carrier pigeon. I'm not sure they'll survive in this heat. And if you've been meaning to review your legals or you're scaling up and you want to get everything in order, then I'll put Ian's details in the show notes. He's obviously on LinkedIn. He's mentioned that, so go and follow him on there. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming up next. I've got some really good guests, HR, sales, tech, and some successful business owners. So thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time on Get Financially Fit with Debbie Hancock. Thanks, Ian, and have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, Debbie. Bye.